tread, blood follows.
What up, and welcome back to another Malazan Book of the Fallen video. This is Memories of Ice Chapter 6, and it is a gnarly one. Let's get into it. Talk about setting the stage for the rest of the book and creating that drama and all that stuff. But before we go too far, just basic housekeeping is that we're going to go through the chapter, just like review analysis in a non-spoilery way, and then I'll let the newbies know when to bail out so that we can talk spoilery goodness. But basically we pick up with Gruntle and his crew, and they're continuing on with their mission to take Karuli through Saltoan. And what we find out is that the reason why they're going to Saltoan is to basically help these the leaders of the city, as it were, get the city under control, and they need help basically. And the thing that they need help from is the Panty and Daman, which is this bigger undercurrent that's going through the whole book of what everybody is kind of focused on and worried about. But it isn't actually Karuli going to impose his will. What we find out is that he's been summoned there by the true leaders of the city, which is this whole kind of criminal underworld of mob bosses and all of that stuff. And so they meet up with Nectara, who is herself one of these mob bosses, and she leads them, Gruntle and Stani and Harlow and Karuli, to this meeting with all the other mob bosses. And like everywhere else, the Panty and Daman is just like gobbling up everything in sight, and so they, you know, back against the wall, need to call in some reinforcements. But yeah, they summon Karuli there, which kind of begs the question of like, who is this dude to, you know, this whole kind of criminal underworld of mob bosses calls in as like reinforcements for this big giant threat, like existential threat they're all facing. Karuli's able to corroborate, says it's all that you've heard and worse. They talk about the 10 Scoury, and I think even the first time we hear about the Children of the Dead Seed, which is just an absolutely gnarly concept.
You're disgusting.
But Karuli doesn't promise him an army or all this intervention of his god or anything like that. He basically says that the path forward, and the only path forward, is really an information campaign, like a proactive propaganda campaign that really educates the residents of all these cities and towns in Saltoan of what they're really looking like if these folks come to power, right? That they're going to be dispossessed essentially, and that not everybody gets into that like upper echelon of prize you know, followers. Even if you convert and all that stuff, you're going to be deemed unworthy and whatever, and ultimately be driven to these you know, super like animalistic ways that people are going to resist, and they're not going to want to do all this bad stuff and whatever. But there's like a, you know, foundational, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where once people get starving and whatever, like morals are out the window, and it forces you to do these disgusting, sadistic things that we hear about from the 10 Scoury.
And God is my witness, I'll never be hungry again.
And so really the only way to kind of unify everybody is to put that out there. It's kind of like the sunlight is the best disinfectant philosophy of you know, like information warfare, basically, to unite folks against this bigger threat. During the whole entire meeting, Stani and Nectar are like totally getting it on the whole time, which is like super distracting, but also like super hilarious. She starts razzing Harlow and Gruntle on the way out of town for being jealous, which they totally are, but they pretty much then, after advising these mob bosses, resume their journey back to, you know, out on the road towards Kapustan, which is their bigger thing. On the way out of town, they see there's like a newly sanctified temple to Treach, so there's all kinds of like ascendant level stuff happening in the background. And we also hear that there's like been a bunch of murders and stuff like that, which nobody really knows what's going on over the last 4 nights, but us and Gruntle realize that this is like Korbal Broach doing his shady dealings again. But yeah, they resume their journey to Kapustan, and they're out on the road. They come to this like place where these bandits obviously had tried to like ambush Bauchelain and Korbal Broach, so we get this gnarly display and power of how just G'd up those dudes are. Gruntle, we see, is concerned because he senses this convergence happening at Kapustan, and like the siege is coming, etc. Between, you know, where the Panion Damon's essentially trying to take over, and doesn't want to get caught in there. Karuli's like, bro, just get me close. He's like, if needs be, you can totally bail me if it's too hot once we get there, and I'll just roll in on my own.
Don't even trip, dog.
When they're on the road, we get our first introduction, I think, to the Barghast warriors who Gruntle and his crew run into, and it ends up being Hitan, her brother Kafal. There was another brother, I can't remember his name, but they're down here hunting demons, right? And she kind of describes these demons as being like having knives for arms and running around and causing terror, and so they're down there trying to figure out what's the story. They're kind of like shaman gods or spirits or whatever, like reporting that there's these demons running wild down on the plains. Gruntle actually asks them, like, are you coming down and bringing all the Barghast to get busy against this Panion Daman? She's like, no, we're not here for that. Then they're sitting around the campfire. Her and Gruntle end up boning.
Wow, that was fast.
Then they come to this scene, and it's kind of confusing because there's a lot going on, but they're at Bauchelain's carriage, and there's been like this massive scrap. The hillside's been blown open with like the upside down trees that they use to, you know, contain the Barghast spirits or whatever. Their carriage is empty except for like all of Korbal Broach's like disgusting necromantic experiments where he's like taking all these different body parts and like creating living things in his little chest. Super gross. But then we get this whole backstory of what happened, right? Because Bauchelain and Korbal Broach were like investigating these Barghast tombs where all these spirits were there, and they were trying to like free and then enslave these Barghast spirits, because that's kind of like what they do. They're like necromancers, they're demon summoners and all that stuff. But while they were like kind of satisfying their own intellectual curiosity on all these barrows, these demon things that Hitan was hunting kind of set upon them and basically just wreaked havoc, right, across the whole thing. And it's clear like that Bauchelain and Korbal Broach are trying to play it cool. Like, yeah, it was kind of gnarly, you know what I mean? But if you look at both Buke and poor Emancipor Reese, it's clear that this is like a much gnarlier thing that has kind of gone down. Gruntle like pulls Buke off to the side because he's like, yo, when I was leaving Saltoan, they were talking about all these murders. He's like, you were right about the you know, your suspicions about Korbal Broach or whatever. But that's when we really find out how gnarly it was, because Buke is like shook, right? And he's like, I'm not even gonna worry about these dudes. He's like, because we are straight up dead. He's like, these demons are coming back, and that's a wrap.
Game over, man. It's game over.
But he basically just corroborates also like what a gnarly pair and what a scary group the Bauchelain and Korbal Broach are, and just how bad this threat is, because even those two dudes could like barely hold their own and kind of fight these things off. And so he's really depressed, and Gruntle and him basically have a falling out because he's like, yo, look, stop being so depressed. I know you had like a, you know, a bad, horrendous tragedy in your life and your family and stuff, but basically buck up, Buttercup, and get over it. And we got like, you know, all this stuff, but it's just clear that Buke has been shook and is in like a really emotionally a bad way, depressed and essentially given up on life. And they even almost come to blows in just a really tense moment for the friendship, obviously. He even tells him like, yo, Stani, you know, would be there for you, and there's people that care about you and stuff. And he's like, I don't care, I'm done. And he's just, yeah, in a bad way. But they're basically basically all resigned to die, essentially, in this attack that's inevitable and coming imminently this night. And then we get our first look at these demons, which Karuli calls Kachin Shemal, and he calls them Kel Hunters, which is like a specific thing within that. And they just run in. To me, they're described as like velociraptors with giant like swords for arms, and they straight up are undead, run in and just fuck shit up.
And boom goes the dynamite.
And everyone just basically hanging on for dear life, essentially looking like they're about to be overrun. One charges Gruntle, and right as he's about to be mauled at the last minute, Harlow steps in and basically takes it on the chin for his homie, but the kind of joy of that is relatively short-lived, as another one runs in and grabs Gruntle with his claws and has him just straight up pinned down and is just ragdolling him everywhere, puncturing every major organ. And so that's when the scene essentially fades to black.
That is brutal.
So not a long chapter in the telling of it, essentially, but pretty gnarly, action-packed, impactful, and yeah, we get a better sense of what we're up against in this one. So this is where those newbies can go ahead and get out, because I do want to cover a few of the spoiler bits that were in this chapter, and then we'll see you for Chapter 7. So there's a lot of stuff we could talk about for the spoiler section, but some of the stuff I feel like this is really establishing those emotional highs that don't seem like a big deal now, but end up, you know, being the things that make these losses later on so powerful, right? Because you have like just the, you know, Harlow joking around about Stani being a mom and having a baby and kind of laughing at the idea of that, and just because of her personality type and what that foreshadows about like all the Toll the Hound stuff and even the end of this book, honestly, and all that stuff. And I don't know why, but I just love their whole like banter and relationship where they're constantly like giving each other crap and ragging on each other and arguing, and it's a real like odd couple kind of like scenario, but it's like grounded in love and this kind of like unrequited peace, right, where Harlow's like in love with her but he can't say anything about it. And I just really you know, that stuff, you know, seems whatever now as like a first-time reader reading Chapter 6, but for those of us who know what's happening with Harlow at the end and with the whole ordeal that Stani goes through later on, and then also what happens with, you know, baby Harlow and all the stuff in Toll the Hounds and everything, just makes it more meaningful. And that's kind of like, it seems like a real friendship for that reason too, because like that's how I am with my friends, right? It's like we let you never say, hey bro, I love you and you're an important person in my life and stuff. It's like, hey, what's up, you idiot? Like, oh, it looks like you're getting fat, you know, this and that. But it's like we have open, honest communication, and we care about each other and aren't afraid to give honest feedback, but it's always like in a loving way, or it's grounded in love, even when we're being jerks to each other, if that makes sense in a weird way. And I felt like this really captured that kind of dynamic that seems like a real life friendship, and also creates that meaning for us later in the books. For me, even though, you know, I always bag on dudes like Rhaegal for saying stuff about the character work, even though I know what he's saying, it's just not his favorite part of the series. I do think that like this is an example of why I think the character work is good, or at least why it works for me, because, you know, it kind of speaks to there's some authenticity, I guess, to the way it feels. I do love this chapter also from like the lore standpoint as well, because this is our first introduction to like the Whiteface Barghast, which I think is a really cool storyline and has a lot of really cool characters, and obviously becomes more important later in Dust of Dreams and stuff like that. But there's a lot to keep track of, right? Because like they're talking about demons, which you don't realize as a first-time reader that they're talking about the Kachin Shemal, and obviously aren't connecting the dots on who the Panian Seer is and where his power's coming from and all that stuff. But then there is real demons, right? Like with the Barghast spirits and like the demons that Bauchelain and Korbal Broach are able to summon, and just their necromancy and and so it's like it's easy to be, I think, confused about all the different aspects of the demons. On a reread, it's pretty clear because you know what's happening, and like every time someone talks about a demon with reference to the Kell Hunters, you're not confused. But as a first-time reader, you don't know what a demon is versus a spirit versus whatever. And so again, just a lot of moving parts. And really, it's like a whole function of the beginning stuff, right? Because now on a reread, you know, it's clear that these Kell Hunters are like the product of this matron who was released when the Panny and Dominant, his sister, sealed the rent and allowed them to escape. And it took her a while, and then she was having these babies and finally setting them loose and all of that stuff. So it's all basically there actually to be mined, but it's just on your first read you'd never have the context or the perspective or the knowledge of all these races to be able to do all the connecting of the dots and to kind of see that through line that really is there in the prologue and continues right up through the second book through the end when you get the big reveal of what's ultimately the big the rip off the mask kind of moment, the Scooby-Doo moment. But that's what makes these things so rich on a reread too, is that you can go back and pick up all these nuggets and see how the threads are all weaved through and there for you to kind of slaver or, you know, salivate on and what have you. And I don't remember explicitly, but I do think this is the first time that they tell us straight up that the matron is the source of the Kachin Hunters and all that stuff. There's been like all these references, but this, I think, when Karuli just says it straight out to the ignorant Gruntle who's like the stand-in for us, I'm pretty sure this is where that stuff all gets laid out in a more explicit way. So yeah, short chapter, super fast paced. The action pretty much picks up from here on out. So it's going to be a lot of fun getting into chapter 7 and beyond. I'm almost done with the book itself, but I'll try and get caught up on the video. So we'll leave it there. Like, subscribe, merch, go check out the new website, which I'll post a link. We got a new project going on. So yeah, a lot of good stuff. Thanks for all the support. We're going to get busy on the rest of the chapters, and like, subscribe, all of that stuff. Join the Discord, buy some merch, do any of that stuff. Become a patron. You can become a member directly through YouTube. We don't care how you enjoy us. We just care that you enjoy us. So yeah, until next time, happy reading.